evening for me. I'm 9 hours ahead of you here in Bratislava. But I am deeply grateful for this connection and that technology has given us this gift. So good morning, dobre ráno. Yeah, I'm teaching English in Slovakia all the way through the end of the school year. So I got this job. I am a missionary worker, but the work I do is teaching, and I had to apply as a teacher. And in the course of my interviews for this job, I was taken by surprise by one of the questions that my interviewers asked. They wanted me to tell them about a negative experience I had had with a student. I felt my mouth go dry when they asked me this question because the truth was that in my first year of teaching back in the year 2000, 1999, I had many negative experiences with students. I was always overwhelmed, and I wasn't yet skilled in lesson planning or classroom management. When my classes were boring or ran short or felt pointless, a vacuum would form in the classroom, and that vacuum would be instantly filled by challenging student behavior. Some of that challenging behavior was just pranks, like they would sneak up to the whiteboard while I wasn't looking and change the instructions I'd written so that it featured names of body parts. Some of it was like low-level vandalism, like a student disconnected and threw away the handset on my classroom telephone. One time that year, a long simmering tension between two students flared, and they both stood up, kicked their desks aside, and very nearly came to blows. Fortunately, at that point, my phone had been replaced, and I was able to call the school security officer, and he came and very, very calmly defused the situation and invited the boys to come back with him to his office and talk things through. But it was a stressful year. I had a lot to draw on, and I didn't want to draw on any of it. Didn't want to talk about any of those issues because my stories were the stories of a teacher who wasn't very good at her job yet. But the interviewers wanted me to answer. So I took a breath and I told them about Mackenzie. Mackenzie had come to my class determined not to like anything about it. Not the teacher, not the subject. At first, she would just give me baleful looks and heave dramatic sighs. But eventually she stopped doing any of the assigned work at all, and her behavior escalated to disrupting the class with disrespectful behavior. I decided that I should call her mother to let her know what was happening. But when I did, there was no answer. But I did get their answering machines, so I left her a message and asked her to call. And leaving that message turned out to be a mistake. The mother, Mackenzie's mother, was absolutely furious. Apparently, she had given very explicit instructions to the school that we were not to leave messages, especially behavior-related messages, on her answering machine. And she demanded to have a meeting with me and the school administrators. I honestly felt like she was being unreasonable. I had so much on my plate that was so difficult. And Mackenzie was only one of 150 students I was responsible for. I didn't know how I was supposed to guess that there was a special protocol for connecting with her mother about, a behavior issue. And when the day came, I went to the meeting. I wasn't sure what to expect. And I'll tell you what happened at that meeting. But before I do, I want to take a little detour. I want to tell you about one of my very earliest personal memories. It was when I was maybe 4 years old, and my mother had just tried to explain the concept of God to me, telling me that God knew everything and could be found everywhere, but that we could not see him. She told me that he heard our prayers and that he lived in heaven, which was up in the sky. I remember feeling very frustrated that God existed, but that I couldn't see him. And when my mother's attention was turned elsewhere, I went and dragged a chair outside to our driveway, and I stepped up onto it to get a little closer to heaven. I turned my face upward and I shouted up to God. I said, God, I want to see you. Please come down here. I stayed out there for a while, repeating my request, but I got no answer. I finally stepped down from the chair, brought it back inside, and accepted that God was not going to make an exception for me. So I envy Abram in this morning's Bible reading, because he receives a literal calling. God addresses him directly in a language he understands, with a difficult but unambiguous directive: leave his country and his kindred and his father's house and go to the land that God will show him. I also identify with Abram, because while God never did as I demanded that day in the driveway, God did make it known to me that I too should leave my country and my kindred and my family's house to a land that God would show me. Slovakia was not a place I'd given a lot of thought to before I got this job. It's a small country in the middle of Europe with a population of about 5 million, which is what you would have if you combined Los Angeles and San Diego. And yet, as one of my students was quick to point out, they do consistently outplay the US in hockey. People would ask me why I was going, and I had a handful of reasons I would give. I wanted to live in a foreign country. I wanted to really learn a language. I wanted to get back to teaching. With closer friends, I would go a little deeper. My divorce a few years ago had freed me up to possibilities like this. And I didn't want to go to my grave never having taken this kind of deep dive, stepped up to this kind of adventure. It was something I really wanted to do. But behind these reasons was something deeper still, something that I couldn't yet articulate. The call to go was a call to faith. I sensed that God would bless me in this call, that like Abram, I was being called to go in order to be blessed and to be a blessing. God's promise to Abram isn't just that he will be blessed. It is ultimately that in him, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Theologian Rodney Sadler Jr. writes that the blessing of Abram will be the catalyst for others being blessed. The clear implication from this is that blessing is a transitory concept. It is intended to multiply and impact others. So now I want to go back to that meeting with Mackenzie's mother. Mackenzie's mother didn't like me any more than her daughter did. But in the meeting, she bravely told me and the administrators about Mackenzie's history, her social disabilities, her learning challenges, her family background. And although she began in anger, it wasn't long before Mackenzie's mother was crying tears of grief. Those tears snapped things into focus for me. I realized that in addition to everything else my job as a teacher required, it also required me to love my students, including Mackenzie, the way her mother loved her. My interviewers nodded their heads as I told this story, and they seemed satisfied. And now I'm here, a missionary in Slovakia, here to witness the lives of my students, friends, and colleagues, here to give them my attention, time, and love, here to bless them as I have been blessed. Amen.